Hello and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. This week we've been in Hungary during obviously pretty historic, momentous events. I'm very pleased today that we have a great guest on the program. That's Dr. Attila Demko, who is an academic, he is a security expert and also an author. He's author of what will be a trilogy, actually. The Fury of the Tsar, Vicious Circle, which is his new book, is coming out very soon on Amazon, so you can get it there. I'm delighted he's joining us now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I should actually add that your name on the book, if you're looking it up, is actually David Auteur, right? That is actually the name that he has on his writing name. Can I start by asking you, Attila, let's go straight into the nitty-gritty. In the West anyway, in Britain at the moment, everyone is talking about Putin, and basically they are, one has one view, one has another view, and I told you so, and this, that, the other. What kind of a man are we dealing with?
He's a man of history, so he wants to make history. He wants to rebuild Russia as a strong power. That's what I'm writing in my books. So actually these books are about how he could divide NATO. There is Ukraine in it, quite a lot of Ukraine, but it's about how he could defeat NATO, because that's his ultimate goal, to be basically the sole strong power on the continent. He knows very well that the Germans and the French, they are much weaker than Russia. He already told it to Monsieur Macron just a week ago, that your nuclear forces are nothing compared to ours. So he sees that if NATO is not here, if NATO is in chaos, EU is in chaos, then he's basically the strongest power on the continent. Mm. So that's I think ultimately what he wants, to push back NATO, and Ukraine is one step in it, and that the enormously big step, but most probably not the final step, what he wants to make. So my books, actually, book one was written before the crisis, and this one is also written before the Ukraine crisis, but book three, which I don't know how we'll write, would have been about how Ukraine is being totally dismantled and NATO is being dismantled. The first part, actually, he did that, so I will focus on NATO on book three. All of it is based on basically what I have read as a former defense official and as a NATO official. He's a man of history. He wants really to rebuild Russia as one of the big powers of the world. Right. And he needs, first step, Belarus and Ukraine for that. He already took Belarus, and now he's taking Ukraine. But the whole story, this story is not written from Western perspective. So I really tell why the Russians are angry and why he's furious. So not all what he's doing is without reason. So he has his reasons why he is furious, because Russia was pushed back after the 1991 fall of the Soviet Union. So the Americans were picking country by country from his orbit. And he was also, I think, in a way humiliated by the Americans mainly, calling him and his country, calling him a dictator very early on, and his country as a big fuel station. And he's proving to the world that Russia is not just a big fuel station. It's a military power, it's an economic power, not a very big one, but still it's an important economic power because of oil, gas, and some technologies they have, military technology especially. So all this comes together, and of course he's a man closing the age of 70. Yeah. So he wants to show the world what he's made of. And of course he feels that his time is now limited, so he's doing it now.
It's interesting actually, because at the very end of this book, as you pointed out to me, you sort of mention about the book coming, that it will actually sort of be about the invasion. So in other words, you sort of saw this coming.
Yes.
Whereas in, say, Britain, for example, there's been, well, basically I think the response has been one of surprise amongst many people. They didn't think he would go this far.
So actually this time, in the last few weeks, I thought the same. that he's not going to do it this time.
Right.
And he can achieve his objectives peacefully. That's what I believe. That all of this power projection is to make Ukraine and the West to give up. So Ukraine, especially, to give up and become neutral. And he would continue. So I thought that it's attrition, because Ukraine is a poor country. Ukraine is a country of many problems, and Ukraine is a country with a lot of ethnic Russians or pro-Russian people, at least on the eastern and southern part of Ukraine. So I thought that he's doing this attrition work just to make Ukraine to crack. But he didn't do that. So it was a surprise to me. It's not a surprise that he's doing everything to undermine Ukraine and to undermine NATO. That was his goal since 2008.
Right.
So actually he started this process in 2008 with the attack on Georgia. But again, I'm not the typical analyst in this, typical Western analyst, because I show the Russian side. So actually, the main player in his book is Vladimir Putin himself. So I'm showing his mind. I'm showing his surroundings. I'm showing his inner circle. I'm showing how they interact with each other, that he's the Tsar and he's really humiliating his people, but sometimes he listens. So he's a good guy. He has a great mind on geopolitics. He has, of course, his vision of Russia is not something we would like to see in our countries, but he has a vision for his country. That's what I try to describe in a non-usual way, because the usual is that he's just evil. No, he's not evil. He's not like Darth Vader. He's a person of his culture. He's a person of his time.
What is his culture, particularly Putin? I mean, sort of socially. I mean, when you say sees himself as a man of history, how does that manifest itself apart from invading?
Well, invading is part. If you look at the list of Russian invasions anywhere on the net, you will find a lot of invasions, including invading Hungary several times. So they invaded us in the last 200 years at least 4 or 5 times. So actually, they invaded everyone around. What is he made of? First of all, he's a man of KGB. In the West, we always say that he's a KGB man. Actually, he was quite a low-level officer in Eastern Germany. I have a scene in the book, in book 1, in the first book, which I wrote 2 years ago, when he's in Dresden and destroying the KGB files, because there is a crowd outside, and he goes out and threatens the crowd that he will shoot at them to destroy the remaining files before they come in. Because he's paranoid, because he thinks that the crowd is organized by CIA and CIA wants to take his files. It's an actual event. It happened. Right. It happened in Dresden, and he did what I describe in the book. But I also describe his interesting relationship to his wife, because that was also a big thing at the time. And now that he divorced, we can see that he has a taste of ladies. Right. So I try to put a personal part of his life into the book. But he's a KGB man. He's very paranoid of the West. He learned not to trust anyone, and he's also a wounded man because he saw the great Soviet Union to collapse in just 2 years. To collapse, to see your country. British Empire was the greatest empire the world has ever seen. And of course, today there is no British Empire. There are. Britain is everywhere, of course. It's a global power, but still not the empire it used to be. But the British Empire, was 50 or 60 or 70 years to transform itself to what is today, the Commonwealth. So it was not just like a moment. But can you imagine a shock if your empire is being destroyed in just 2 years?
Yeah.
So it's a shock in him. It's a deep hurt in him. And it's a deep hurt to see that Ukrainians are resisting. I'm pretty sure that now he's in his Novo-Ogaryevo dacha and thinks and outraged why the Ukrainians are resisting him so much. Because he sees Ukrainians and Belarusians as part of his wonderful Eastern Slavic great country. So that's who he is. Actually in a way he's an idealist in a terrible way, because he has this ideal of these 3 nations
right.
Together in a great country and talk down to everyone in Europe. He sees himself like basically the ruler of this part of the world.
Yes. Do you think, here we are on, what is it, day 4? I mean, events move quickly, obviously, but we're on day 4 after the invasion. And the narrative, at least, that's being said in the West and Western press, is that basically it's going slower than he would like, and that the Ukrainians are putting up an extraordinary fight. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think there is the Western narrative, there is the Russian narrative, and there is maybe reality somewhere in the middle.
Right.
So I think the Western narrative is exaggerating in that it's slow. Mm-hmm. Actually, the southern advance is actually fast. So the breakout from Crimea, I traveled all these regions, I traveled across Ukraine. I worked for the Ministry of Defense, so we knew where he will attack. So we went with a mission to see these regions. So we have been to Perekop, which is at Crimea, where Crimea meets Ukraine proper. Crimea is a peninsula, so it has only 3 ways out. So it was extraordinary that the Russians could break out from Crimea like this, because we saw the Ukrainian troops there, and they were waiting for the Russians to attack. Yeah. And it's also extraordinary how they could bypass Kherson. So and then took 2 bridges on the Dnieper River. So I see some of the Russian moves in the south as great successes, and very, very fast successes. So I don't agree that it's slow. And actually, when you say the fuel is out and you say that it's slow, then you are contradicting. I saw it just before I came to give this interview on BBC. Yeah. On a BBC article, that first part of the sentence, it's slower than expected. Well, the fuel of the Russian tanks are out. So which one? Because if they go slow, then the fuel is not out. The fuel is usually out when you go faster than your logistics. So actually, they go faster than their logistics. So I don't see that in the south. They are already at Mykolaiv, which is a large shipbuilding city. We have been there too. It's a strategic city for Russia, actually, because their shipmaking suffered a lot because Ukraine was responsible for some parts of their ships. So that's why Ukraine is so important for him, because part of the Soviet defense industry, a large part of it is in Ukraine, including helicopter motors, helicopter engines, ship turbines. A lot of stuff is in Ukraine. So he wants maybe to get back this part of his defense industry. So Mykolaiv is an important town, and Odessa is an important town, and then Transnistria. So I think this attack vector is going well, and the other attack vector to Mariupol is going well too. They are already at Berdyansk, which is not that far from Mariupol, and I think that now they see that there is stronger than expected resistance. So they saw it in Kharkiv, they saw it in Kiev, but now I think he switched gears, and he wants to take over the eastern part of the Ukrainian army, which is near the Donbass. Right. That's the strongest army formation of the Ukrainian army. So if he surrounds it, then Ukraine's military capabilities are halved. So I think that he is focusing now, or he will focus in the next few days, if there is no breakthrough in the negotiations, because he's also pushing the Ukrainians with the negotiations that if you don't do this, we will do this. So maybe the Ukrainians budge or break. I don't think so now, looking at President Zelensky, but it can happen. So they are negotiating today in Gomel, in Belarus. So what I see in the south is going well. Kharkiv, they say that there was a victory. Again, Western press says it's a victory in Kharkiv. I think the Russian had a recon mission to Kharkiv. A recon mission doesn't mean that you want to conquer the town. You just see how strong defenses are. Yeah. So this recon mission maybe went badly. I don't know about that, but that is shown. I saw 2 vehicles burning on TV on I think Al Jazeera. That's not a big victory, but it's portrayed as a big victory in Western press. And the third main vector is Kiev. Actually, I'm surprised that they reached Kiev so fast, because the Americans were warning the Ukrainians for for weeks that Kiev is the target, is a target or the main target. So either they didn't build up defenses at the north, at Chernobyl, and at other points at the border with Belarus, or the Russians somehow outmaneuvered them. For example, it's not reported in the Western press, but I know from my Ukrainian sources that at the airport at Hostomel, there was a big battle, and the Western sources say that they killed a Chechen commander. So it's a big victory. I'm sure they killed the Chechen general, because the Chechen volunteers are some of the cruelest and toughest fighters of Russia. Mr. Kadyrov is his private army. It's Putin's chief of Mr. Putin's private army. So what I want to say that at the airport, a lot of helicopters and a lot of equipment of the Ukrainian Air Force was destroyed. So it's maybe very hard for the Russians to keep that airport, but they already reached one big objective. Much of the Ukrainian Air Force is out, it's destroyed. And part of it was destroyed in a drone helicopter raid on the first day by the Russians. So the real picture, just like as I write in my books, much of the Russian propaganda is just like that, propaganda, but some of it is true. And, we have to face it, that BBC or CNN or the major news portals, they are influenced by what the defense ministry says in Britain, what the Pentagon says in the US. So they write down many times what the Pentagon or the Ministry of Defense wants them to write down. So generally, I feel that it's not going as well for the Russians as they hoped for, especially the resistance of the people. So maybe there is less support for Russia in the population, even on the east, than they thought and what Putin hoped. But it's not going terribly badly, as it's shown today by some of the major news sources in the West. But it can go badly for several reasons. We don't know what is going inside in Russia, for example. How big is the support for this war? Because we see signs that the support is not that strong for the war.
Yes, I understood actually that in fact it was by no means unanimous support for the war beforehand.
They didn't prepare the Russian public. So when I looked at the reports coming out from the US, and they were right. So the reports of the CIA and the Pentagon, the warnings were close to 100% right. Not the dates, that was silly to give dates that they are attacking on the 16th or whatever. But the reports were right. But two things were missing for me, very, very interestingly from the picture. One, they didn't prepare the Russian public. There was no big propaganda campaign that the evil Ukrainians just want to destroy the separatist republic. It started now, but they didn't work on the public for months and months and months. If you repeat things enough times, people start to believe it anyway. And especially in a country like Russia, where TV is still a very important factor. And for Russians, they still watch TV. So that's one thing. The other thing, there was not enough occupying troops. So for attacking, you need high-level troops, elite forces, and they do have elite forces. But where are the occupying troops? To keep a town, you don't need elite forces. Actually, even civilians can wreak havoc. Somebody attacking an attacker force in a town, because it's just you shoot out from the window. If you kill 2 soldiers before you get killed, it's already something big for somebody who is a civilian. But the Russians have occupying forces, the National Guard. They could have, and it's nowhere to be seen yet, or we didn't see it yet. So it's the Russian army which is going in. So these are the factors, I would say that were unseen before, but now it's very clear.
Do you think as well that one of the influences on Putin at the moment would be what appears to be the absolute weakness of the West? In terms just even on a cultural level, this point is made, and every day we sort of see instances of this, most recently with our own head of MI6 tweeting about LGBT rights right at the heart of this. How big a part would that play in his thinking?
Yeah, so it's an excellent question, truly, because that's what I'm thinking since the beginning of this crisis. I really think that Putin thought that we are weaker than we are, and much of this is because of this woke craze, which is in the U.S., as you say, in Britain, in Germany. I mean, when we debate if a transgender man or whatever, a woman, can compete with females, and that's the main debate in our countries, why China and Russia is rising, then we are in trouble. So actually we have the culture war within our countries. It's eating up our energies, and we are not looking to the world, what's happening. It's not only Russia, it's not only China. Africa is collapsing. The Sahel region is collapsing, and we don't talk about this because we are engaging in silly debates. We are engaging in almost religious debates about these questions. When I see Adele attacked because she says that she's happy to be a woman, or when J.K. Rowling is attacked for being anti-trans, for me it's like, guys, the world is collapsing around us. Is this the most important question of a large part of the British press? Sometimes I torture myself and I read Guardian, and you know, half of it is like this: what do I feel about myself?
Yes.
What is this? What do you feel about yourself? And stuff like that. The world is collapsing around us, and we are blind to it. And now it's a big wake-up call. And I'm happy to see that Germans, at least the Germans, woke up. You know, they just said today that they're going to spend 100 billion euros more on military this year, which means, if I read it well, that they will more than double their military budget. And it's a left-green coalition who said that. So maybe the West is weak, but we weakened ourselves and we made ourselves looking foolish in the eyes of Putin or Xi Jinping, that's for sure.
Do you think it really is a wake-up call for the West? How can one tell? I mean, I don't mean to be an invidious comparison, but I remember with the woke ideology, everyone said at the beginning of COVID and the pandemic, this will change everything, you know. And you just wonder, no, it didn't, basically. It became more intense. And I'm just wondering that because this is such a, blatant and such a understandable threat, that it actually might make a difference to the West.
Well, maybe, at least I'm hoping, because we need to focus ourselves on the external threats, and we are making internal threats and divisions out of issues which should be not the most important issues in our lives.
I mean, can I sort of ask, as somebody who advised the government and is a security expert, what is your view when you see something from like the head of MI6 saying that LGBTQ rights are in fact probably one of the most important things that separate us from Putin and Russia? We should keep tweeting about this. I mean, to me, it's astounding, and I am embarrassed when I read that. What's your view?
I mean, it's a complete misreading of the situation. It's not ideology, really, which separates us from Putin. It's not authoritarian against democratic or anti-LGBT against LGBT. No, Russia wants to be the strongest power on the European continent. That's it. It's a fact. And if Russia would be more democratic and pro-LGBT, that wouldn't change the fact if a person like Putin is in the chair, or who is making the decision, that they are a threat to us. They are not a threat because they are anti-LGBT. They are a threat because they are aggressive. And even a democracy can be aggressive. But if you look back what the US did in 2003 in Iraq, I mean, it was an aggressive act. Russians always say that anyway. That what did you do in Iraq? That's what they say. So what I want to say that Russia, for Putin, of course, he has this macho ego, and he talks about LGBT people sometimes in a not very high manner. But for him, this is question number 1,200. And number one is Russian power. Number two is Russian power. Number three is Russian power. And when somebody in MI6, or I think he he knew what he's saying is untrue, but he needed to say that. I'm pretty sure that these politicians, many of them, don't believe what they say about this.
But they might as well, because the effect is the same.
Yeah, well, you know, if they think this is the important question in the world, I tell you one thing. My friend served at the European External Affairs Service, which is the European Corps Diplomatique, as a diplomat in Africa. And you know, in that African country, they are not really LGBTQ free. So the European Embassy, based on instructions from Brussels, started to push this agenda. First of all, European relations nosedived with that African country. I'm not going to name it. The Chinese came in, the Russians came in, they didn't ask questions about LGBTQ. So is it good for us that we are pushing ourselves out from several African countries and China comes in and Russia comes in? Is it, you know, it's a question. Is it clever? Maybe the MI6 director can answer this. But the main thing was that they didn't even help the LGBTQ community, because they started to beat up LGBTQ people after these pushes.
Yes.
That, you know, it's self-defeating. It's self-defeating.
Oh, absolutely. Coming back to the current situation, a lot of people's fears about it obviously do relate to the sheer surprise element of what could actually happen, what could be triggered elsewhere, you know, what conflagration could come next. What do you think of the, I mean, this is speculation, I do know, but I mean, you know, where would you see the real dangers coming from this particular act that we're talking about?
From the war in Ukraine?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think the main danger for us, at least in Eastern and Central and Eastern Europe, that there is a huge refugee wave.
Yeah.
It's amazingly big already. We took in 62,000 people in 4 days. So for Britain, you have like 7 times the population. It would be hundreds of thousands. And Poland is also taking a lot of people. So that's a refugee. But we don't know where it will end, what it will transform into. Just now, Russia announced that they are raising the nuclear forces threat level to the highest. So they are basically, that sounds very ominous, that the Russian nuclear forces now on standby to strike. This is not a good news. So if the Ukrainian operation doesn't go well, and Russia is bogged down, and because Ukraine is getting more and more weapons from the West, they can react irrationally. I still don't see that Putin is a suicidal person. He's not. But you never know. The worse it is for him and for his entourage, actually, the more dangerous it is. Because if he's cornered, he will attack. And if he's more cornered, he will attack twice the strength and twice the aggressiveness. So to play with Putin, he's the all-in type of guy. It's dangerous. So that's, for me, that's the biggest danger. Of course, I would like to see the Russians to lose, but not in a very humiliating and spectacular way. Because if that happens, then we are in real trouble. Because then we have an extremely angry Russia facing at us. And as I said, as I described in my books, they have a lot of tools to divide us, especially in this region, because this region is full of history and change borders and ethnic animosities. I think from Britain, people look at the Central and Eastern Europeans as one bloc, but actually we have more than 1,000 years of history fighting each other. So imagine that Hungarians and Romanians look at each other like the Irish and the Brits. So we had a lot of bad blood between each other. We are still in NATO, but next to each other. The same is true with Hungary and Slovakia, not to that extent. Or actually there is trouble between Poland and Lithuania. It's not very obvious, but part of the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, was a city called Vilno in Poland before. It was a Polish city, ethnically Polish city before Stalin took it away. It's not a big issue now between Poland and Lithuania, but the Russians are working to exploit all of these fault lines in our region. So I would be afraid if for a Russian humiliating defeat in Ukraine, because that could further the Russian feeling of humiliation and revenge.